The pilot's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. Calm, controlled, public. "Ma'am, you'll need to gather your things and move to coach. Now." Conversations died mid-sentence. A zipper froze half-closed. A coffee cup hovered in the air. Forgotten. The woman in seat Street 3A did not move. She lifted her eyes slowly, meeting his, and for half a second the plane seemed to hold its breath with her. She was not dressed the way people expected trouble to look. No designer jacket, no flashy jewelry. Just a dark navy blazer, soft at the elbows, pressed slacks, sensible shoes. Her hair pulled back clean, not tight, not loose. Her face unreadable. But her fingers, resting on the armrest, curled just enough to show tension. The pilot stood in the aisle, shoulders square, uniform crisp, authority radiating from him like heat off asphalt. "We've already discussed this," he said, lower now, almost polite. "You're making people uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. The word landed heavy and slid across the polished surfaces of the business cabin and settled into the spaces between the seats. A man across the aisle leaned back, lips pressed thin, eyes flicking away too quickly. Someone behind her exhaled, long and relieved, as if a correction was finally being made. The woman did not argue. She did not ask why. She simply asked, quietly, "Is that an order?" The pilot hesitated, just a beat too long. Long enough for something to crack beneath his certainty. "It is," he said, "for the smooth operation of this flight." She stood. The seat released her with a soft, mechanical sigh. She reached up, unhurried, and pulled her bag from the overhead bin. The zipper sounded too loud in the silence. As she stepped into the aisle, a flight attendant moved instinctively to block the view. A practiced smile fixed in place, eyes darting. "We'll take care of you back here," she murmured, voice tight. The woman nodded once. She did not look back at the pilot. She did not look at anyone. She walked. The walk to coach felt longer than the aircraft itself. Each step passed a different version of judgment. Some faces looked away. Some stared openly. A few watched with something like curiosity, the way people watch storms roll in from a distance. The woman felt the shift in air as she crossed the invisible border between cabins. The lighting dimmed. The space narrowed. The sounds changed. Here, there were babies fussing, knees pressed too close, the rustle of cheap fabric seats. The attendant pointed to a middle seat near the back. "Here you go." The woman slid in, knees brushing strangers on both sides. She set her bag at her feet and folded her hands in her lap. Her breathing slowed. Her expression did not change. What no one saw was the small movement of her thumb inside the pocket of her blazer. A single press. A silent click. Somewhere beneath the fabric, a device woke up. Her name was Rachel Monroe. On paper, she was a mid-level consultant traveling for work. In reality, she had spent the last 14 years inside systems like this one, learning where they bent and where they broke. She knew how authority spoke when it expected obedience. She knew the difference between safety and control. And she knew that the most dangerous abuses rarely looked dramatic. They looked reasonable, polite, procedural. The plane pushed back from the gate. Engines roared, a low animal sound that vibrated through the floor. Rachel closed her eyes as the aircraft lifted, the pressure pressing her into the seat. For a moment, she let herself feel it. The weight, the imbalance. Then she opened her eyes and began to watch. Up front, the pilot's voice returned over the intercom, warm now, almost friendly, a routine greeting. Estimated flight time, weather conditions. His tone carried confidence, the kind that reassured passengers and reassured himself. In the aisle, a flight attendant passed, offering water with practiced efficiency. When she reached Rachel, her hand paused. Their eyes met. Something flickered there. Recognition. doubt. The attendant leaned closer, voice low. "I'm sorry," she said, barely audible. Then she moved on. An hour into the flight, the turbulence began. Nothing violent, just enough to rattle cups and draw murmurs. The seatbelt sign chimed on. In the forward galley, two attendants stood together, whispering. One laughed softly. The other glanced toward the cockpit, then back toward the cabin. Rachel watched the way rules softened depending on who they applied to. She noted the time. She noted the sign still lit. She noted who stayed seated and who did not. A man beside her shifted, elbow encroaching into her space. "They do this all the time," he muttered, not looking at her. "Act like we're the problem." Rachel did not answer. She was listening, not just to him, but to the rhythm of the aircraft, the cadence of authority moving unchecked. In her mind, pieces began to align. This was not about a seat. It never was. When the plane landed, the applause was scattered and thin. People surged into the aisle, eager to leave. Rachel remained seated until the crowd thinned. As she stood, she caught a glimpse of the business cabin again. Wide seats, empty now. The space she had occupied looked unchanged, innocent, as if nothing had happened there at all. Near the door, the pilot stood with the crew, thanking passengers, smile fixed, posture flawless. When Rachel approached, his eyes flicked to her face, then away. "Have a good day," he said, automatic. She stepped into the jet bridge and stopped. Just long enough. He felt it. He turned back, irritation flashing before professionalism smoothed it over. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Rachel looked at him fully now. Really looked. She smiled, small and controlled. "Not anymore," she said. Then she walked away. 3 hours later, in a quiet hotel room overlooking the city, Rachel spread her notes across the desk. Times, phrases, names. She replayed the audio, listening to the pilot's words, the inflection, the justification. She listened to the whispers, the apologies, the laughter in the galley. Outside, traffic moved like a distant river. Her phone buzzed once. A message from a secure number. "Are you done?" She typed back. "Almost." By morning, the report would begin its journey through channels the pilot had never had to think about. Committees, reviews, patterns. It would not be fast. It would not be clean. There would be denials, explanations, lawyers. But it would move. Because it had to. Because systems only changed when someone stayed long enough in the discomfort to map it. Back at the airport, another flight was boarding. Another pilot adjusted his cap. Another passenger took her seat. The machinery of it all kept going. But somewhere inside that machinery, a record now existed. Quiet, precise, unavoidable. And the man who had told a woman to go back to coach had no idea that his certainty, spoken so easily, had just placed him directly in its path. The email arrived just after sunrise, subject line blank, sender masked behind a string of internal characters. Rachel read it standing at the window, coffee untouched, the city below still gray and half asleep. Proceed with Phase 2. Maintain cover. No contact with carrier leadership. Observe response behavior. She exhaled slowly. Phase 2 meant waiting. It meant watching how power reacted when it sensed a shadow but could not yet see a face. By mid-morning, the airline's response had already begun to ripple, subtle at first. A customer service apology landed in her inbox, carefully worded, bloodless. "We regret any inconvenience you may have experienced." No admission, no name. A voucher was attached, generous enough to feel like a payoff if you did not know better. Rachel closed the message without clicking anything. Compensation was not contrition. It was insulation. At the airport, Operations hummed as usual. Planes arrived, planes left. Somewhere, the pilot from yesterday's flight was filing routine paperwork, unaware that his words were now data, stripped of tone and ego, and preserved exactly as spoken. Rachel moved through the terminal like any other traveler, unnoticed, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that invisibility was not absence. It was access. She sat at a cafe near a departure gate, notebook open but empty, listening. 2 gate agents spoke behind the counter, voices low. "Heard there was a situation yesterday," one said. The other shrugged. "They moved someone, that's all I know." A pause. "She made a complaint, I think." The first agent snorted softly. "They always do." Rachel did not look up. She let the words settle. Always do. As if repetition erased meaning. Her phone vibrated again. A secure call this time. She stepped away, found a quiet corner near a window overlooking the tarmac. "Go ahead," she said. On the other end, a man's voice, older, measured. "We've pulled the pilot's record," he said. "Nothing on paper. Clean. But there are patterns in the informal logs, notes that never became reports." Rachel closed her eyes. "How many?" she asked. "Enough," he replied. "And not just him. That was the real fracture. Not one pilot, not one decision. A system that allowed discretion to drift into dominance, comfort into exclusion." Rachel ended the call and watched a plane taxi past, sunlight glinting off its fuselage. She thought of the word uncomfortable again, how often it was used as a weapon, how easily it disguised fear. The next flight boarded on time. Rachel took her seat in economy this time, by choice, window side. She observed how the cabin filled, how eyes moved, how voices shifted depending on who sat where. In the row ahead, a woman in a tailored suit was offered help with her bag before she even asked. Across the aisle, a man with worn shoes struggled alone. The difference was quiet, automatic, learned. Mid-flight, a flight attendant paused beside Rachel. Same one from yesterday. Younger than she looked up close, eyes tired. She hesitated, then leaned in. "They're talking about it," she whispered. "The crew, yesterday." Rachel met her gaze. "What are they saying?" The attendant swallowed. "That it was blown out of proportion. The people are too sensitive now." She straightened, mask back in place, and moved on. Rachel stared at the seat back in front of her, jaw tightening. Sensitivity was what they called accountability when it arrived uninvited. By the time the plane landed, the airline's internal machinery had begun to shift. A memo circulated, vague, emphasizing customer care, reminding crews of professionalism. Nothing about bias. Nothing about power. Rachel read it later in her hotel room, the words sliding past her like fog. This was the phase where institutions tried to correct tone without touching structure. She forwarded the memo to the secure address. A note attached. "This is not reform. This is avoidance." That evening, she met with a man she had not planned to meet. He waited in the lobby, pretending to scroll on his phone. When he saw her, he stood too quickly. "Ms. Monroe," he said, voice low. "I shouldn't be talking to you." Rachel studied him. His uniform jacket was folded over his arm, not worn. A sign. "Then don't," she said. He shook his head. "I can't keep quiet anymore." His hands trembled slightly. "I've seen it happen. More than once. Different flights, different captains, same outcome." He swallowed hard. "They always say it's about comfort, or balance, or safety. But it's never that." They sat in the corner, far from the desk. He spoke in fragments at first, then faster, words spilling once the down cracked. Names, dates, who complained, who was protected, who learned to look away to keep flying. Rachel listened without interrupting, her mind assembling the picture piece by piece. When he finished, he looked at her with something like fear. "If they find out I talked," he said, "I'm done." Rachel's voice was calm. "You won't be," she said, "but it will get harder before it gets easier." He nodded, as if he had expected nothing else. That night, Rachel sent a final message through the secure channel. Phase 2 complete. Pattern confirmed. Recommend escalation. She stood by the window again, city lights flickering on one by one. Somewhere above those lights, planes crossed invisible paths, guided by systems built on trust. Trust that the people in control would act without prejudice. Trust that safety included dignity. She knew now how fragile that trust was. In the morning, she boarded another flight. Different airline, different crew. Same sky. As she took her seat, the captain's voice came over the intercom, steady, unremarkable. Rachel smiled faintly. The work was never about drama. It was about pressure, applied quietly, relentlessly, until something that had been hidden too long finally gave way. Somewhere, a pilot would soon be called into an office he had never feared before. Somewhere, a file would be opened that could not be closed with a voucher or a memo. And somewhere, inside the system, a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. Rachel settled back, eyes forward, breathing even. The plane rolled toward the runway. The engines roared. And beneath the sound, a deeper shift had already begun. The call came at night, the kind that rang once and stopped, then rang again as if testing whether she was alone. Rachel answered without looking at the screen. "Yes?" The voice on the other end was clipped, controlled, careful not to say names. "They noticed," it said. "Not you. The shape of you." Rachel leaned back against the wall, the cool paint pressing into her shoulder blades. "How?" she asked. A pause. A request came down, informal. They want to know who filed the complaint, and why it hasn't gone away. By morning, the airline's posture had shifted. The smiles were still there, but the edges had hardened. At the gate, a supervisor stood where a junior agent usually worked, watching lines form and dissolve. His eyes scanned faces, not tickets. Rachel felt it immediately, the subtle tightening in the air, the way systems braced when they sensed resistance. She boarded early, economy again, aisle seat this time. As she passed the forward cabin, she caught her reflection in the polished divider. Calm, ordinary, unremarkable. Exactly what unsettled them. The captain introduced himself with practiced warmth. His voice carried authority without strain. Rachel listened for what he did not say. In the galley, a flight attendant adjusted her scarf, hands moving too fast. Another checked a manifest twice, lips moving silently as if rehearsing. The supervisor leaned in, whispered, nodded. A choreography of caution. Rachel felt a flicker of something like satisfaction, then pushed it away. This was not about being seen. It was about being understood. At cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign went dark. Service began. The attendant reached Rachel, offered a drink, eyes lingering for a fraction too long. "We had some feedback," she said, voice low. Rachel met her gaze. "About what?" she asked. The attendant hesitated. "About how things look." Rachel smiled, gentle, disarming. "They always care about that," she said. The attendant exhaled, a sound like relief and fear tangled together, and moved on. Halfway through the flight, Rachel's phone vibrated. No signal was supposed to get through. It did. A message, brief. "Legal wants to speak. Today." Rachel closed her eyes. Legal meant the shape had sharpened. It meant the airline was no longer soothing itself with memos and vouchers. It meant someone higher up was asking harder questions and not liking the answers. They met in a glass-walled conference room near baggage claim. The lawyer arrived alone, grey suit, careful smile, eyes that measured distance. He did not offer his name. "Ms. Monroe," he said, sitting without waiting to be invited, "we take allegations seriously." Rachel folded her hands. "I'm sure you do." He nodded, as if conceding a small point. "We'd like to resolve this quietly." The word settled between them, heavy. Quietly meant contained. Quietly meant no precedent. "What does quiet look like to you?" Rachel asked. The lawyer slid a folder across the table. Numbers were inside, generous and neat. Apologies, too, carefully phrased. Rachel did not open it. "You're asking me to trade silence for comfort," she said. The lawyer's smile thinned. "I'm asking you to consider what prolonged conflict costs." Rachel leaned forward. "It costs you more," she said softly. "You just haven't calculated it yet." His eyes flicked to the glass wall, to the people passing outside. "You should know," he said, lowering his voice. "The discretion cuts both ways." Rachel held his gaze. "So does daylight." The lawyer gathered the folder, stood. "Think about it," he said. "We'll be in touch." Rachel watched him leave, his reflection splitting across the glass like a fracture. That afternoon, the pilot from the original flight was pulled from the schedule. Not grounded, not disciplined. Reassigned. Training. Administrative. The word traveled fast through the crew rooms, wrapped in speculation and resentment. Rachel heard it from a barista, from a gate agent, from a man who pretended not to know why he was telling her. Reassigned meant protected. It also meant afraid. The next call came from the different voice, older, worn smooth by years of choosing words. "You're making waves," it said. "You always do." Rachel smiled, despite herself. "You taught me how." A pause. "We can't move yet," the voice continued, "but we're ready when you are." Rachel looked out at the runway, planes lifting one by one into the blue. "Give me one more flight," she said. "One more data point." The voice hesitated. "Be careful." Rachel ended the call without promising anything. On that flight, the tensions snapped. A man in the forward cabin raised his voice, sharp and demanding, unhappy with his seat, with the delay, with the world. The crew bent around him, apologetic, deferential. When a woman a few rows back asked for help with her bag, she was told to wait. Rachel watched the exchange, the imbalance plain as gravity. She felt the device warm against her skin as it recorded, patient and impartial. After landing, as the cabin emptied, the captain lingered by the door. He thanked passengers with a nod that barely dipped. When Rachel approached, he paused. "Everything all right today?" he asked, eyes searching her face. Rachel smiled. "It depends on who you ask," she said. He frowned, then waved her on. The smallest crack. That evening, Rachel sent the final packet. Audio, notes, timelines, patterns. She attached a single line. Escalate. Within minutes, the reply came. Acknowledged. Stand by. Rachel sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing through her in waves. This was the moment between push and fall, when systems gathered themselves and decided which way to break. The break came quietly. An internal announcement sent after hours. A senior leader would be addressing concerns the following morning. Attendance mandatory for select staff. Rachel read the list. Operations, legal, training, executive communications. The shape had finally found its face. At dawn, she returned to the airport. The building felt different, as if it knew. Posters about service and respect lined the walls, newly placed, edges curling. Rachel walked past them, boarding pass in hand, a reflection moving through slogans that arrived too late. At the gate, a familiar supervisor stood stiffly, jaw tight. He did not meet her eyes. On board, the captain's voice came over the intercom, steady, professional. Rachel settled into her seat, heart rate slow, mind clear. She knew what came next would not be loud. It would be procedural. Emails, meetings, statements. The kind of change that arrived with signatures and left scars you could not see. Her phone vibrated once more, a final message before silence. CEO wants briefing. Direct. Rachel closed her eyes. The engines spooled up. The plane began to move. Somewhere above the clouds, authority was preparing to meet something it had underestimated. Rachel opened her eyes, gaze fixed forward. The climb had begun, and this time, there would be no quiet way back down. The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner. Rachel noticed it immediately, the way stress always left a physical residue in places where decisions were about to be made. The table was too long for the number of people seated around it. Empty chairs waited like witnesses. A screen glowed at the far end, paused on a generic title slide about customer experience. No names, no logos, just a promise of neutrality that no one in the room believed. They started without introductions. A man at the head of the table cleared his throat and spoke as if reading from inside his own chest. "We're here to address concerns raised about recent flights," he said. Concerns. The word drifted, soft and evasive. Rachel sat near the wall, notebook closed, hands still. She was not here to talk. She was here to see who flinched. A woman from training leaned forward, fingers interlaced. "We've reminded crews about professionalism," she said. "About tone, about avoiding misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. Rachel felt it then, the familiar move. Turn harm into confusion, confusion into accident, accident into nothing at all. Across from her, a legal counsel nodded, pen tapping once, twice, 3 times. The sound was sharp, defensive. "Passengers are sensitive right now," someone added. "Everything gets recorded." Rachel lifted her eyes. Several people shifted. Not enough to look guilty, enough to look aware. The man at the head of the table glanced toward her, then away. He did not ask why she was there. He already knew, or suspected, or feared. When the meeting ended, nothing had been decided. That was the decision. Delay, diffuse, control the narrative until it forgot itself. Rachel stood with the others, chairs scraping softly. As she reached the door, the legal counsel stepped beside her. "Ms. Monroe," he said quietly. "A word." She stopped but did not turn. "You're putting people in difficult positions," he continued. "Good people." Rachel faced him then. His eyes were tired, not cruel. Tired was worse. "Good people don't need protection from the truth," she said. He pressed his lips together. "Truth is complicated." Rachel shook her head once. "Power makes it complicated," she replied, and walked out. Outside, the terminal buzzed with movement. Families clustered. Business travelers paced. The airport did not care about briefings. It cared about flow. Rachel blended into it easily, letting the noise wash over her. She checked her phone. No new messages. That worried her more than silence usually did. Silence meant recalculation. The recalculation arrived an hour later, disguised as kindness. A senior operations manager caught up with her near a window overlooking the runway. "Rachel," he said, using her first name as if they were old friends. You've raised important points. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. We want you to know we're listening. Rachel watched a plane lift, its shadow racing across the tarmac. Listening is not acting, she said. He chuckled softly. Change takes time. Rachel turned to him. So does harm, she said. But it accumulates faster. He sighed, shoulders dropping just a fraction. What do you want? He asked. There it was, the question beneath all the others. Rachel's voice stayed level. I want you to stop pretending this is about optics, she said, and start treating it like what it is. He waited. She did not fill the space. Finally, he nodded once. I'll see what I can do, he said, already backing away. Rachel knew what that meant. He would see what he was allowed to do. That evening, the first real fracture appeared. An internal message leaked, not to the press, to the crews. A pilot group chat lit up with anger and fear. Screenshots made their way to Rachel through a channel she did not acknowledge. Words like witch hunt and scapegoat floated beside others like finally and about time. The divide was no longer quiet. It was widening. On her next flight, Rachel felt it before she saw it. The way the crew watched her. Not suspicious, curious, measuring. She took her seat, window this time, economy again. A young flight attendant stopped, hesitated, then offered a drink she had not asked for. On us, he said, voice steady but eyes uncertain. Rachel thanked him. Kindness counted too. It always did. But kindness without courage was just delay in a softer voice. Mid-flight, turbulence rattled the cabin harder than expected. Bags shifted. A baby cried. The seatbelt sign chimed on. Rachel watched the crew move, this time precise, by the book. They stayed seated. They waited. The change was immediate, visible. Fear had sharpened compliance. She felt no satisfaction. Fear was a poor teacher. It taught obedience, not understanding. After landing, as passengers filed out, a woman lingered near Rachel's row. Middle-aged, well-dressed. Her eyes were red. I saw what happened to you, she said, barely above a whisper. Rachel studied her face. Which time? She asked gently. The woman swallowed. On another flight, she said. Different airline, years ago. She hesitated, then reached out, touched Rachel's arm briefly. Thank you, she said, and walked away. That night, Rachel sat in her hotel room, lights off, city glowing beyond the glass. She replayed the recordings, not to relive them, but to strip them of emotion. Words mattered, pauses mattered, who spoke first, who stayed silent. She catalogued it all, building a spine of facts that could not be bent by intent or excuse. Her phone buzzed once, a secure message. Board briefing scheduled, executive level, tomorrow. She slept poorly. Dreams crowded with narrow aisles and open mouths that never spoke. In the morning, she dressed carefully. Neutral colors, nothing that asked for attention, everything that invited underestimation. At the airport, security waved her through. At the corporate building adjacent to the terminal, a badge waited at reception with her name printed cleanly. No title. Titles were revealed later. The executive floor was quiet, in a way that felt rehearsed. Thick carpet, muted tones. People who moved as if they had practiced moving without leaving marks. Rachel was shown into a smaller room this time. Intimate. Strategic. A man sat alone at the table, reviewing something on a tablet. He did not look up when she entered. Sit, he said, not unkindly. Rachel sat. He finally raised his eyes. You've caused quite a stir, he said. Rachel met his gaze. I didn't, she replied. I documented one. He smiled faintly. "That's the difference between our worlds," he said. "You think facts speak for themselves." Rachel leaned back. "They do," she said. "Just not to everyone." He studied her for a long moment. "What happens next?" he asked. Rachel answered without hesitation. "You decide whether this becomes a case study or a cover story," she said. "Either way, it stops being quiet." His jaw tightened. "You're very confident," he said. Rachel shook her head. "I'm very prepared," she replied. A silence settled, heavier than before. Somewhere beyond the walls, a plane took off, engines rising, the sound threading through the building like a reminder. The man tapped his tablet once, then set it down. "We have one chance to contain this," he said. Rachel's eyes did not leave his. "You had many chances to prevent it," she said. When she left the room, she did not know which way he would choose. She only knew that the room itself had changed. Something had been named there, even if not aloud. Outside, the airport continued its endless choreography. Departures, arrivals, the illusion of order. Rachel stood for a moment, letting the movement steady her. The climb was nearing its steepest point now, and somewhere above it all, the final reveal waited, patient as gravity, ready to pull everything down to truth. The executive did not call back that day, or the next. Silence settled in, thick and deliberate, the kind meant to exhaust rather than intimidate. Rachel understood it for what it was, a test of endurance. Institutions always waited, hoping resolve would decay faster than memory. She did not give it the satisfaction. On the third morning, the airport woke to something new. Not panic, not chaos. Precision. Uniformed compliance officers stood near crew entrances. Clipboards, tablets, names checked twice. Conversations stopped when they approached, then resumed in lower keys. Rachel watched from a distance, coffee cooling in her hand, as the machine adjusted its posture. This was not reform. This was containment in uniform. Her phone vibrated once. A calendar invite. Mandatory executive briefing. Noon. Location withheld until check-in. That detail alone told her everything. They were done pretending she was incidental. The room this time was windowless. No glass walls, no view of runways or sky. Just a long table, 12 chairs, all occupied. These she had only seen in press releases and earnings calls now existed in 3 dimensions. Older, sharper, more cautious than their public images suggested. At the head sat the CEO. He did not smile. He did not stand. He simply looked at her, assessing weight and consequence the way some men assessed numbers. "You've put us in a position," he said. No preamble, no courtesy. Rachel did not correct him. She took the empty seat and placed her folder on the table without opening it. "You put yourselves there," she replied. A few heads turned. The CEO raised one hand. The room stilled. He leaned forward. "You understand how much damage this could do," he said. Rachel nodded. "Yes," she said. "I also understand how much damage has already been done." A murmur rippled, quickly suppressed. The CEO's jaw tightened. "We've reviewed your materials," he said. "Selectively," Rachel replied. Silence snapped into place, brittle and alert. A woman to the CEO's right spoke next, voice calm, surgical. "Legal. You're alleging misuse of captain's discretion," she said, "and systemic bias." Rachel met her gaze. "I'm demonstrating it," she said, "with timelines, corroboration, and pattern consistency." The lawyer's eyes flicked to the folder. "And what do you want?" she asked. There it was again. Rachel did not rush her answer. She let the room sit inside it. "I want you to stop treating discretion like a shield," she said. "I want transparent criteria for passenger relocation. I want independent review of complaints, not internal filtering. And I want accountability that does not disappear into reassignment." The CEO exhaled slowly. "That's not how airlines operate," he said. Rachel leaned forward. "Then that's why this keeps happening." A man at the far end laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You're asking us to expose ourselves," he said. Rachel turned to him. "No," she said. "I'm telling you you're already exposed. I'm offering you a way to decide how it ends." The room shifted. Not agreement, calculation. The CEO stood at last. He walked to the screen at the far wall and tapped a control. A slide appeared. Passenger experience metrics. Clean lines, soft colors. "We're a business," he said. "We manage risk." Rachel stood with him. The move surprised them. She pointed to the slide. "Then manage this one," she said, "because what you call discretion is showing up as discrimination. And discrimination is not a public relations problem. It's a regulatory one." The word hung there. Regulatory. He turned to her. "You're threatening us," he said quietly. Rachel shook her head. "I'm documenting you," she replied. "There's a difference." For the first time, something like unease crossed his face. The meeting ended without resolution. But it did not end without impact. As Rachel left, she felt eyes follow her. Not dismissive now, but wary. She passed through the terminal again, the noise louder, sharper. A flight crew walked by, conversation stopping abruptly. One of them met her eyes and nodded. Small, almost nothing. It was enough. That night the announcement came. Not public, internal. A captain placed on indefinite leave pending review. Language careful. No admission, no apology. But a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. Rachel read it once, then again. This was not the end. It was the fracture point. She sat on the edge of the bed, folder open now. Inside were documents she had not yet shown anyone. Credentials, authority, a title that changed rooms the moment it was spoken. She closed the folder again. Not yet. Power revealed too early lost its leverage. Outside, a plane roared overhead, lights cutting through the dark. Rachel lay back and stared at the ceiling, pulse steady. The climb was almost complete. The next move would not belong to the airline. It would not belong to legal or executives or pilots protecting their own. The next move would belong to the truth, delivered at altitude, where there was nowhere left to hide. The morning broke with rain streaking the terminal windows, thin lines sliding downward like something trying to escape. Rachel stood at the security checkpoint, shoes off, jacket folded over her arm, watching the rhythm of authority in motion. Today, it felt different. Quieter, too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a controlled burn. Her phone buzzed as she slipped it back into her pocket. One word. Now. No signature, no pleasantries. The office was not at headquarters. That was deliberate. A leased floor in a nondescript building near the airport. Beige walls, frosted glass, no logos. Neutral ground. The kind institutions used when they wanted distance from their own name. Rachel was escorted inside by a man who did not speak, did not smile, did not introduce himself. He opened a door and stepped aside. 6 people sat at the table. No one rose when she entered. The CEO was there, so was the general counsel, a senior operations executive she recognized from television interviews. 2 men in suits without pins or branding. Government adjacent, not airline. And at the far end, slightly apart, the pilot. He looked smaller, seated. Not diminished, just stripped of the altitude that came with the uniform and the cockpit. No stripes on his shoulders now, no cap. His hands rested flat on the table, fingers spread, as if grounding himself to something solid. He did not look at Rachel when she took the chair across from him. The CEO spoke first. "We're past preliminaries," he said. "This meeting is about exposure." Rachel nodded once. "Good," she said. "Then we can stop pretending this is about misunderstanding." The pilot shifted, just barely. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the floor was sharp in the quiet room. "I followed procedure," he said suddenly, voice louder than necessary. "I made a judgment call." Rachel did not respond. She watched his jaw tighten, the pulse beating visibly at his temple. Men like him were used to control. Silence unsettled them more than accusation. One of the unmarked men leaned forward. "Captain," he said evenly, "you've been removed from flight duty pending review. This is not disciplinary yet." The word "yet" hung in the air. The pilot swallowed. His eyes finally flicked to Rachel. "She recorded me," he said. "Not anger, betrayal. She set me up." Rachel spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, level, impossible to grab onto. "I boarded with a valid ticket," she said. "I sat where I was assigned. I did not provoke you. I did not speak to you until you spoke to me." She paused. "If your authority collapses when observed, it was never authority. It was permission." The General Counsel cleared her throat. "We need to be precise," she said. "This isn't about intent. It's about impact." Rachel turned to her. "Intent explains behavior," she said. "Impact defines consequence." The counsel nodded slowly. She knew that was true. The CEO leaned back, fingers steepled. "What happens if this goes external?" he asked. Not to Rachel, but to the room. One of the government men answered. "You face a civil rights inquiry, regulatory scrutiny, possibly congressional interest." The CEO closed his eyes briefly. Calculations ran behind them. Stock price, board patience, legacy. Rachel reached into her bag then. Not the folder, not yet. She placed her phone on the table instead and tapped the screen. The room filled with sound. The pilot's voice. Calm, certain. "This cabin is usually reserved for a certain type of traveler." A pause. "I think you'd be more comfortable in coach. No shouting, no slurs. Just exclusion, wrapped in professionalism." The pilot's face drained of color. "That's not what I meant," he said. Rachel met his eyes. "That's not how impact works," she replied. The CEO did not interrupt this time. No one did. Rachel picked up the phone and slid it back into her bag. "That recording is not leverage," she said. "It's evidence." She finally opened the folder and laid its contents on the table. Credentials, identification, authority, printed in black and white. The room shifted all at once, chairs creaking, breath catching. The unmarked men exchanged a glance. "I am a federal aviation safety inspector," Rachel said. "I was assigned to observe." I observed. Her gaze swept the table, landing on each face in turn. What happens next is no longer optional. The CEO stood slowly, as if gravity had increased. "You should have identified yourself," he said. Rachel shook her head. "Then you would have behaved," she replied, "and I would have learned nothing." The pilot pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. His chair fell with a sharp crack. "You ruined me," he said, voice breaking through control at last. Rachel did not flinch. "No," she said. "You documented yourself." Silence followed. Heavy. Final. Outside, a jet thundered overhead, unseen but unmistakable, shaking the walls for just a moment. When the sound faded, the room felt smaller, contained. There were no speeches after that, no threats, no bargaining, only process. As Rachel left the building, rain still falling, she felt the weight shift. Not lift, shift. This was not victory. It was exposure. The kind that forced systems to choose between correction and collapse. She walked toward the terminal, shoulders squared, pace steady. Behind her, doors closed, phones rang. Decisions began moving through channels that could not be reversed. Above her, planes climbed into grey sky, carrying passengers who would never know her name. That was fine. Rachel did not need recognition. She needed accountability. And this time, it had nowhere left to land. The fallout did not arrive like an explosion. It came like weather. Slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. By the time Rachel reached the terminal, the meeting was already mutating into documents, phone calls, calendar holds marked urgent. She felt it in the way people moved around her now. Not with suspicion, not with politeness, but with distance. Systems did that when they realized something irreversible had been set in motion. They pulled back, creating space, pretending neutrality. Her phone stayed silent for most of the afternoon. That was deliberate. Decisions at this level were never made in public or in haste. They were made behind closed doors, by people who spoke in numbers and precedent, not emotion. Rachel found a seat near a wide window overlooking the runway, and waited. Waiting was part of the job, always had been. She watched a plane taxi past, white fuselage streaked with rain, engines humming low and steady. She thought about how many times she had sat in a seat just like that one, listening, watching, writing things down that other people thought would never matter. How often harm hid behind calm voices and reasonable language. How often it survived because no one wanted to disturb the surface. An hour later, the message finally came. Formal, measured. You are requested to remain available for continued proceedings. Further instructions to follow. No congratulations. No reassurance. That was how she knew it was real. The pilot's suspension became official before nightfall. Not announced, not explained. Just a quiet removal from the schedule. His name replaced by a blank space that crews pretended not to notice. Rachel heard about it from a baggage handler who spoke too quickly. From a gate agent whose voice dropped when she mentioned it. From a flight attendant who stared at the floor while saying, "They pulled him." No one said why. Everyone knew. That evening, Rachel checked into a different hotel under a different reservation. Standard procedure once exposure crossed a certain threshold. She ordered food she barely touched and sat at the desk, reviewing what came next. Requests for interviews, internal audits, witness statements. Long hours of testimony, delivered in rooms designed to drain people of certainty. She welcomed it. Process was slower than outrage, but it lasted longer. Her phone buzzed again, a call this time. She answered without hesitation. "They're pushing back," the voice said. Same one as before, older, steadier. "Of course they are," Rachel replied. "They're arguing discretion. Operational necessity, isolated incident." Rachel closed her eyes. "And," she added, already knowing. The voice sighed. "And they're questioning you." That landed heavier than anything else. "On what grounds?" she asked. "Tone," the voice said. "Presence. Why you didn't identify yourself. Why you recorded." Rachel felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Not fear, but recognition. The script never changed. "Let them," she said. "Everything I did was within scope." After the call ended, Rachel stood and walked to the window. The city lights blurred through rain, streaking into soft lines. She thought about the pilot again. About the moment his voice had broken. Not when he realized he was wrong, but when he realized he was no longer protected. Power rarely mourned the harm it caused. It mourned the loss of immunity. The next morning, the airline issued a statement, carefully neutral, acknowledging concerns, affirming commitment to respect. No names, no admissions. Rachel read it once and set it aside. Statements were for the public. Evidence was for the record. By midday, the first witness agreed to speak on the record, then another, and another. The pattern solidified, no longer anecdotal, no longer dismissible. Discretion used selectively. Complaints softened, rerouted, dissolved. People trained not to escalate, not because it was right, but because it was easier. Rachel catalogued it all, her mind sharp, her movements economical. This was the phase where precision mattered more than passion. Late in the afternoon, she was called into a smaller room at the leased office. No executives this time, just process. An investigator slid a document across the table. "This is formal now," he said. "There will be hearings." Rachel nodded. "I expected that." He hesitated. "It won't be clean." Rachel met his eyes. "It never is." When she left the building, the rain had stopped. The air smelled washed, new, deceptive. She walked slowly through the terminal, past travelers absorbed in their own lives, unaware of the quiet reckoning unfolding above their heads. A child laughed. A suitcase tipped over. An announcement echoed overhead, routine and reassuring. Rachel paused beneath the departure board and looked up. Rows of destinations blinked back at her. Cities, times, promises of movement. She thought about how many people moved through these spaces every day, carrying stories no one heard. How many were corrected, redirected, quietly reminded of where they were expected to sit. This case would not fix everything, she knew that. It would not erase bias or make authority gentle. But it would leave a mark, a record, a reminder that discretion had limits and that someone was always watching. Rachel picked up her bag and walked toward her gate. The next phase would be harder, louder, slower. It would test her patience, her credibility, her resolve. She welcomed that, too. The engines of a departing plane roared outside, a deep, rising sound that vibrated through the floor. Rachel felt it under her feet and smiled faintly. The climb was no longer theoretical. It had begun. The hearing did not feel like a courtroom, but it carried the same gravity. Windowless, neutral colors, a long table scarred by years of careful argument. Rachel sat at one end, alone, hands folded, spine straight. Across from her, the airline's legal team arranged papers with deliberate slowness, a ritual meant to establish control. At the center, the review panel waited, faces unreadable, trained to listen without reacting. The chair cleared his throat. "Inspector Monroe," he said, using her title now. "You understand this proceeding is administrative, not criminal." Rachel nodded. "Yes." "And that our scope is limited, I understand." She understood more than that. She understood that limitation was where accountability often went to die. They began with questions about process, dates, authorization, whether she had deviated from protocol. Rachel answered without embellishment. She spoke plainly, precisely, as if laying stones in a straight line. When asked why she had not identified herself sooner, she did not hesitate. "Because the behavior I was assigned to observe disappears when authority announces itself." A murmur rippled, quickly suppressed. The airline's lead counsel leaned forward. "So you admit you withheld information," he said. Rachel met his gaze. "I withheld my title," she replied. "I did not withhold my presence." He smiled thinly. "And you recorded conversations, as permitted under federal regulation during an authorized inspection." She slid a document across the table. He glanced at it, jaw tightening. The panel chair nodded once, The stone line extended. They played the audio. Not all of it, just enough. The pilot's voice filled the room, stripped of uniform and context, reduced to sound and implication. No one interrupted. No one explained. When it ended, the silence felt heavier than any accusation. The chair broke it. "Captain Discretion," he said slowly, "does not include exclusion based on perception." He did not look at the airline's counsel when he said it. Witnesses followed, one by one. A flight attendant who spoke softly, eyes down, describing patterns she had learned not to question. A gate supervisor who admitted complaints were often reclassified to avoid escalation. Each voice added weight, not drama. The airline tried to frame it as inconsistency, as human error. Rachel listened, expression unchanged. This was not about catching someone in a lie. It was about showing how truth survived normalization. By late afternoon, the panel recessed. Rachel remained seated as others stood, the room buzzing with whispered calculations. She felt the familiar fatigue settle in, heavy but clean. This was the work. Slow, exacting, unforgiving. Outside, the press waited, contained behind barriers. Cameras rose as she exited, questions shouted into the air like thrown stones. Rachel did not stop. She did not owe sound bites to a process that required silence. She walked through them, the noise sliding off her like rain. That night, the decision arrived in parts. First, the pilot's suspension was upheld, pending further review. Then, the airline was directed to submit internal complaint data for the previous 3 years. Not public, not yet, but real. Rachel read the notices carefully, marking language, noting where pressure had been applied. This was not sweeping reform. It was leverage. The next morning, a different call came. Short, direct. "We need you in Washington." No explanation. None required. Rachel packed quickly, muscle memory guiding her hands. At the airport, she moved through security without incident, another traveler among thousands. She boarded, found her seat, economy again, window this time. As the plane taxied, she looked out at the lights blurring into lines. In Washington, the building was older, heavier with history. Marble floors, flags that never moved. The meeting room overlooked nothing at all, just walls. Here, the stakes felt larger, less personal. A man with a careful voice explained the implications. "This case will not rewrite policy," he said, "but it will inform it." Rachel nodded. That was enough. Policy moved like glaciers. Evidence gave it direction. They asked her one final question. Would you do it again? Rachel did not answer immediately. She thought of the walk down the aisle, the word uncomfortable, the silence that followed. "Yes," she said finally, "because the alternative is pretending we don't see what we see." When she left the building, dusk had settled over the city. Lights flickered on, reflected in wet pavement. Rachel walked alone, coat pulled tight, breath visible in the cool air. The work was far from over. Appeals would come, arguments would sharpen. But something had shifted. A line had been drawn where there had only been fog. She stopped at the corner and looked up at the sky, dark and vast above the city. Planes crossed unseen, lights blinking steadily. People moved through systems trusting they were safe, trusting they belonged. Rachel turned and continued down the street, steps measured, resolve intact. The climb was no longer rising. It had leveled into something harder. Cruise. The appeal arrived exactly when she expected it to. Not with outrage, not with defiance. With language polished smooth enough to slip past consequence. Rachel read it at a narrow desk in a government office overlooking the Potomac. the river moving slow and brown beneath low winter light. The airline contested scope, challenged interpretation, questioned neutrality. It was all there, arranged like a familiar song she had learned to hear beneath the words. They questioned her judgment. They questioned her tone. They questioned whether a single passenger experience could justify scrutiny at all. They did not question the recording. They could not. Instead, they tried to bury it under context, under discretion, under the soft fog of operational complexity. Rachel closed the file and leaned back. This was the phase where truth was not denied. It was exhausted. The press followed the appeal with less enthusiasm than the incident itself. That, too, was predictable. Outrage burned hot and fast. Procedure bored people. The airline understood this well. They issued another statement, longer this time, full of commitment and concern, promising cooperation while insisting on fairness. The pilot's name was still absent. The word discrimination still did not appear. Rachel noted that omission carefully. Silence could be evidence too. Inside the agency, pressure shifted shape. It no longer came from above, but from the sides. Colleagues who meant well asked if it was worth the fight. Supervisors reminded her how rare it was to get traction this far. Someone suggested she take leave, rest, let others carry it for a while. Rachel thanked them and kept working. She had learned early that fatigue was one of the most effective tools power had. A hearing date was set, then moved, then set again. Each delay tested patience, not legality. Rachel prepared anyway, reviewing transcripts, refining timelines, stripping arguments down to what could not be bent. She spoke less now, listened more. In meetings, she let others talk themselves into corners they did not realize were there. The airline's legal team requested a private conference. Not mediation, discussion. Rachel agreed. The room was smaller this time, the table round instead of long, designed to soften edges. The lead counsel smiled like someone offering shelter. "We want to resolve this without further damage," he said. Rachel folded her hands. "Damage to whom?" she asked. He did not answer directly. He talked about culture, about progress, about learning moments. Rachel let him finish. When he finally paused, she spoke. "You're asking me to accept change that exists only in intention," she said. "I'm asking for accountability that survives attention." His smile faded. "You're making this personal," he said. Rachel shook her head. "You made it systemic." That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A former employee came forward publicly. Not from her case, from years earlier. Different route, same pattern. The story spread faster than the airline could contain it. Rachel watched it unfold on a muted television in a waiting room, faces cycling through disbelief and recognition. This was not her victory. It was momentum. The airline responded by shifting strategy. The CEO did not speak this time. A board representative did. Calm, apologetic, carefully distanced. An internal review was announced, led by an outside firm. Rachel read the firm's name and nodded once. Credible. Expensive. A sign they understood the cost of continuing. Late that evening, Rachel received a call from the older voice again. "They're preparing to settle," he said. Rachel closed her eyes. Settlement was not justice, but it could be structure. "On what terms?" she asked. "Transparency, oversight, training tied to enforcement." Rachel considered. "And the pilot?" A pause. "He won't fly commercially again." That mattered. Not as punishment, as boundary. Rachel slept that night for the first time in weeks without waking. In the morning, she walked along the river, breath steady, mind clear. The fight had narrowed now. Less noise, more consequence. She knew there would be criticism. There always was when resolution arrived without spectacle. But she also knew something else. Systems changed not when they were shamed, but when they were forced to account. The settlement was announced days later. Not flashy, not triumphant. Words like agreement and forward appeared often. Rachel read it once, then again, noting what was included and what was not. It was enough. Not enough to matter. Enough to matter. She closed the document and looked out the window at the city waking up. Planes traced thin lines across the sky, steady and sure. Rachel gathered her things and stood. There would be another case, another quiet walk down an aisle. Another word that landed heavier than it should have. She was ready. The climb had ended. The course was set. The auditorium lights dimmed until the room became a single breath held between rows of people who had spent their lives believing gravity always favored them. Rachel stood backstage, jacket folded over her arm, the low hum of conversation seeping through the curtain like distant surf. She listened to it without listening, fingers warm around a paper cup she would not drink from, pulse steady. This was not a trial, not a hearing, not a settlement announcement. This was where consequences learned how to speak without shouting. When her name was called, it was not dramatic. It was clean. She walked out and the noise softened. Not to silence, but to attention. Faces looked back at her, some curious, some guarded, some already defensive. Executives in tailored suits sat beside line workers with weathered hands. Pilots and attendants, legal and operations, all of them present, because absence was no longer an option. Rachel did not begin with the flight. She began with the space between cabins. She described how a decision made for comfort could become a sentence for someone else, how discretion turned elastic when pulled by the right hands, how a word like uncomfortable carried more power than any raised voice. She spoke in short lines, letting each land. She spoke about systems that learned to apologize without changing, about memos that soothed nerves while leaving habits intact. She spoke about watching a machine correct its posture without correcting its spine. There were murmurs. Not argument. Recognition. A few heads nodded. A few jaws tightened. Rachel did not look at the front row, where the former chief executive now sat without his title. She did not need to. The room already knew who had been measured and found wanting. She laid out the record without spectacle. The recordings, the timelines, the corroboration. She described how patterns formed when no one interrupted them, how protection learned to wear professionalism like a coat, how accountability arrived not with anger, but with patience and proof. She did not raise her voice. She did not soften it either. The cadence stayed level, the way pilots spoke when weather turned, and clarity mattered more than comfort. When she finished, she did not wait for applause. She waited for the room to settle. Then she said what came next would not be easy and would not be fast. Oversight would be external. Criteria would be public. Complaints would be tracked without translation. Training would be audited, not announced. Consequences would be consistent, not negotiated. The words were simple. The implications were not. The first person to stand was a flight attendant from the back row. She did not speak. She simply stood, hands clasped, eyes bright. Then another stood beside her. Then a pilot, older, shoulders squared. The movement spread quietly, a ripple of people choosing to be seen without demanding anything in return. Rachel felt the shift under her feet like a change in air pressure. Afterward, in the corridor that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet, Rachel leaned against the wall and let the weight pass through her. A man approached, careful, respectful. He had once spoken for the company. He did not today. He said the words he had avoided for years, and he said them plainly. Rachel nodded once and thanked him without forgiveness or refusal. This was not about absolution. It was about alignment. Outside, the sky cleared. Planes rose in clean arcs, lights blinking steady against the afternoon blue. Rachel watched one climb until it thinned into distance, then turned back to the building. Her phone buzzed with a message she expected. Implementation timeline confirmed. Independent monitors assigned. Public report scheduled. She closed the screen and slipped the phone away. Later, alone in a quiet gate area, she sat with her bag at her feet and listened to the rhythm of departures. An elderly man across from her folded a newspaper with care. A mother adjusted a sleeping child's blanket. The ordinary persisted. Rachel smiled faintly. Change never replaced the everyday. It made room inside it. When boarding was called, she stood and joined the line without urgency. She took her seat where she had chosen it, window side, economy, by preference now rather than correction. The aircraft door closed. The cabin settled. The captain's voice came over the intercom, clear and even, promising a smooth flight and a respectful journey. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment and breathed. As the plane lifted, she felt the familiar press and release, the balance found again. She thought of the long arc from documentation to consequence, from quiet to structural. She thought of the people who would never know her name and never need to. That was fine. The record existed. The boundary held. At cruising altitude, sunlight spread across the wing, bright and unwavering. Rachel opened her notebook and wrote a single line, not as a reminder, but as a marker. Accountability is not loud. It lasts. She closed the book and looked out at the clouds, steady as a promise kept. Like, subscribe, comment.